I felt it before I understood it. A small weight in my jacket pocket where there shouldn't have been anything. I was standing in the hotel lobby, coat half on, half off, watching the last guest trickle toward the doors. The woman who had been sitting 2 seats away from me all night had just walked past, close enough that her sleeve brushed my arm. By the time I turned around, she was already gone, swallowed by the crowd near the entrance. I reached into my pocket out of habit, looking for my car keys. Instead, my fingers found a small folded card. I didn't know her name. I'd barely heard her speak all evening, but somehow, without a single word, she had just told me something I didn't even know I needed to hear. My name is Nathan Hale. I'm 39, and that night was the first time in 2 years I had put on a suit for something that wasn't a funeral. My wife, Sarah, died 2 years earlier after a long fight with cancer. The gala that night was hosted by the same hospital foundation that had treated her, a fundraising dinner for cancer research, the kind of event we used to talk about attending together back when someday still meant something. After she passed, my life shrank down to a manageable size. Work, the house, quieter than it used to be. Dinner for one, most nights standing at the counter instead of sitting at the table. My friends kept inviting me places, and I kept saying no, until one of them finally stopped asking and just bought me a ticket instead, and told me I was going whether I wanted to or not. So there I was, in a ballroom full of people in formal wear, holding a glass of wine I wasn't really drinking, seated at a round table for 10 with people I'd never met. I'd gotten good, over those 2 years, at being present without really being there, nodding at the right moments, smiling when someone made a joke, answering, "I'm okay," so smoothly that people stopped checking if it was true. I didn't expect anyone at that table to see through it, especially not the quiet woman in dark green sitting 2 seats to my left, who I hadn't really looked at until dessert was served. Her name tag said M. Lowell. That was all I knew about her for most of the night. She was maybe 60, with silver hair pulled back simply, and the kind of posture that made her seem taller than she probably was. She didn't talk much, not in the loud, networking way most people at that table did. She listened. She asked the bartender for water instead of wine, and at one point, when the man across from us went on a long story about his boat, she caught my eye for just a second, the corner of her mouth twitching, like she knew exactly how bored I was, and found it quietly funny. I almost smiled back. Almost. Dinner went on the way these things do. Small talk about traffic, about the auction items, about people we apparently both vaguely knew but had never met. At one point, a server set down a bread basket, and without saying anything, M. Lowell slid it a few inches closer to me, like she'd noticed I hadn't eaten much. I had noticed that about myself too, actually. I just didn't think anyone else had. Then the program started. Lights dimmed, and the director of the foundation walked up to the small stage to talk about the year's progress, the families helped, the research funded. Near the end of her speech, she said something about how the evening was in memory of those we've lost, and in honor of those still fighting. I kept my eyes on the table. It wasn't the words exactly. It was the specific cadence of them, the kind of sentence I'd heard at Sarah's memorial, almost word for word. For a second, the room felt too bright and too loud at the same time, and I had to focus very hard on the napkin in my lap. I felt something brush my hand. It was barely anything. M. Lowell's fingers, just for a second, resting briefly on the back of my hand on the table, like she was steadying something. Then she pulled back and went on watching the stage like nothing had happened. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. The rest of the night blurred a little after that. The auction ended. People started gathering coats, saying their goodbyes. I said polite things to the people at our table, shook a few hands, and made my way toward the lobby. I didn't even see her get up. It was only in the lobby, reaching for my keys, that I found the card in my pocket. The card was small, plain, the kind you'd find in any hotel notepad. On it, in neat handwriting, was a phone number, and below it, a single line. When you're ready to talk about it, no pressure. I stood there in that lobby for a long time, longer than made sense, just looking at those words. I didn't call that week, or the week after. I put the card in the drawer of my nightstand, the same drawer where I kept Sarah's watch, and a few photographs I wasn't ready to put up, but wasn't ready to put away either. 3 weeks later, it was the anniversary of Sarah's diagnosis. Not her death, the diagnosis, the day everything changed. I don't know why that date hits harder some years than others, but that year, it did. I sat in my kitchen at 11 at night, the house silent, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt like I genuinely couldn't carry it by myself for one more hour. I opened the drawer. I looked at the card. I called. She picked up on the third ring, and when I said my name, there was a pause. And then she said, "Nathan, I wondered if I'd hear from you." Like she'd been expecting it, not in an eerie way. More like she'd left a door open and had simply been waiting to see if anyone walked through it. We didn't talk long that first call. Mostly, I just said I didn't know why I was calling, and she said that was fine, that I didn't need a reason. But she asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime. No pressure. And for some reason, that night, I said yes. We met that weekend at a small cafe near the hospital, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu. Margaret, as she introduced herself properly that day, ordered tea and asked simple questions. Not, "How are you doing?" which I'd learned to dodge easily by then, but specific ones. What Sarah's laugh sounded like, what she'd been like before she got sick, not just during. I hadn't been asked those questions in 2 years. Everyone around me had been so careful not to bring Sarah up, afraid of upsetting me, that somehow her name had slowly disappeared from conversations altogether. Talking about her with Margaret, a stranger who'd never met her, felt like opening a window in a room that had been sealed shut for too long. We met again the following week, and the week after that. It became a quiet, steady thing. Coffee on Saturdays, sometimes a walk afterward. Margaret didn't ask much about herself, and at first, I didn't think to ask either, too wrapped up in finally having someone to talk to. But slowly, I started noticing things. The way she sometimes paused before answering questions about her own life. The way she changed the subject, gently but clearly, whenever I asked how long she'd been coming to events like that gala. One Saturday, after weeks of this, I finally asked her directly, "Why did you give me your number that night? You didn't know anything about me." Margaret was quiet for a moment, turning her cup slowly on the table. 12 years ago, she said, I lost my husband, George. Heart attack, very sudden. One day he was there, and then he wasn't. About 6 months after that, I went to an event very similar to that gala. Another fundraiser, another ballroom. I sat at a table where I knew no one, and I spent the whole night doing exactly what you were doing, smiling, nodding, saying I was fine. There was a woman at that table too, older than me even then. She didn't say much to me directly, but at the end of the night, as I was leaving, she pressed a card into my hand. Her number and a note, almost exactly like the one I gave you. I never called her, Margaret said. She looked down at her tea. I told myself I didn't need to, that I was handling it, That calling a stranger about my grief was something other people did, not me. I put the card in a drawer, and eventually, I think I threw it away during a move. I never even learned her name. For years afterward, I wondered what would have happened if I had called. Not because I think she had some magic answer, but because for a long time after George died, I didn't really talk to anyone about him. Not really. Not the way I talked to you about Sarah that first day at the cafe. She finally looked up at me. When I saw you at that gala, Nathan, I recognized something. Not you specifically. The look. The exact way you were holding yourself together. I'd worn that same look for almost a year, and nobody had reached for me. So when I saw you, I thought, maybe this time, I won't be the person who walks past. I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt strangely guilty, like I'd just learned I was, in some way, a second chance for her too. Another part of me felt something looser in my chest, something that had been tight for 2 years. Does it feel strange, I asked, talking about him with me while I talk about Sarah with you? Margaret smiled, small and a little sad. It did at first, but I think that's part of it. Grief makes people feel like they're the only ones in the room who understand what they lost. It isn't true. It just feels true for a long time. That evening, after the cafe, we ended up walking through the small park near her apartment, the same one, she told me, where she used to walk with George on Sunday afternoons. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? I asked. She nodded. The last thing I said to Sarah before she went into hospice was, I'll see you tomorrow. I knew by then that tomorrow probably wasn't coming. The doctors had already told us, but I said it anyway, because I couldn't make myself say goodbye. And then she was gone before I made it back the next morning. My voice cracked on the last part, something it hadn't done in front of anyone since the funeral. I've spent 2 years feeling like I failed her in that moment, like I should have said something true instead of something easy. Margaret stopped walking and turned to face me. Nathan, I'll see you tomorrow, was true. You believed it, in the only way a person can believe something like that at a time like that. That's not failure. That's love, refusing to let go a few hours early. I never got to say anything to George, she continued. He was gone before I even got the phone call. For years, I envied people who got even a few words, even the wrong ones. You didn't fail her. You loved her right up until the last sentence you got to say. I don't know how long we stood there, in that park, under streetlights that had just started to flicker on. But for the first time in 2 years, I cried in front of someone and didn't feel like I had to apologize for it afterward. Things didn't change overnight after that. Margaret and I still meet most Saturdays, still talk about George and Sarah more than either of us probably expected to when this all started. Neither of us has put a label on what this is, not yet. Some days it feels like friendship built on a shared language most people don't speak. Other days, there's something else there too. Quieter, newer, something neither of us is in a rush to name. But I think about that night often. The gala, the bread basket, the hand on mine during the speech, the card in my pocket I almost didn't find. Margaret once told me that for 12 years, she carried the regret of a card she never used, a number she never called, a kindness she let walk out of a ballroom without ever knowing the name attached to it. So when she saw me carrying the exact weight she remembered carrying, she didn't walk past. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do isn't a speech or a confession or a grand gesture. It's just refusing to let someone disappear into a crowd, the way they once watched someone else disappear into one. I still have that card. I keep it in the same drawer, next to Sarah's watch. not because I need the number anymore, I have it memorized now, but because it reminds me that sometimes the people who save us are the ones who were never saved themselves and decided that didn't have to happen twice. This story is a work of fiction, created purely for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is coincidental.